Well, good evening, everyone. It's Steve Maxwell here. This is my first live video Q&A session, and it's going, but I just wanted to welcome you. I'll be welcoming new people the next hour or so as the new people come and go. The way this works is pretty simple. On your screen, you'll have some place where you can type questions, or I can see that down below here. That's what I'm looking at when I look down. And I'll just keep my eye on that and answer questions the best I can. So welcome, and let me know what I can do for you and how I can help you out. A lot of you, I think, are subscribers to my weekly Saturday morning newsletter. I told everyone about this Q&A session this past Saturday. So welcome, and thank you for joining me. I see we've got Mark here. He's just saying hi and good to see me. Mark, is there any particular issue you're dealing with at your place that you'd like some help with? I've got some questions that people have sent in ahead of time by email, but if there's something live here that I can help you with now, and then just let me know. While I'm waiting for you to think about that, I'll just start with a question here. And Sylvain, and he's wondering about outdoor wood for outdoor projects. I'm about to build a new fence with some pressure treated wood, and he says that the moisture content is about 15% of that with a neighbor's moisture meter. So he's wondering if the same principles that I've talked about that apply to indoor woodworking, so furniture building, cabinet making, things like that, apply to outdoor woodwork as well. He wants to build some garden boxes, and it looks here's pressure treated fence, things like that. Well, first of all, the good news is that moisture content matters a whole lot less with outdoor projects. One of the reasons is because the tolerances are much looser with outdoor work than they are with furniture. And in Sylvain's case, the 15% moisture content is pretty well perfect. Wood in, say, Eastern North America will settle down to about 12 to 14% moisture content, equilibrium moisture content when everything's all settled in time. So I'd say you're good to go with that, and let me know how you make out. So Mark has asked me a question. Thank you, Mark. And he's wondering about the best sort of pool heater, a new heat pump, perhaps. To be honest, experience with pool heaters. I do know that certainly in any urban area, natural gas is the cheapest source of conventional energy. I do know that heat pumps are amazingly efficient when it comes to heating spaces. So if you're looking at a heat pump that might work for your pool, then I think that's definitely worth considering. The heat pumps use electricity, so you might think, oh, well, electricity is pretty expensive. I'm not too keen on that. But in reality, they deliver about 2.5 to 3 times as much heat as electricity that goes into them. So that's really the benefit of any kind of heat pump technology. So I would certainly look at that. And there are also some solar collectors that I know a little bit about that might help you out there too. Is it a fairly large in-ground pool, Mark? Just type in and let me know. And while you're doing that, I'll go on to another question I have here. This one came in on my YouTube channel, and it's from a man. He's wondering how he can spray finish something so it looks like thick glass, the finish does, without losing any of the detail underneath. And as far as I know, you can't. You can certainly put a thick, clear finish on things, and it'll protect it very well, and it'll make the wood look like it's under glass, and it's very easy to keep clean. But of course, the thicker the layers that you add, the more covering up of the details, of any crisp routed details you're going to run into. So the thickest sort of clear finish that I know of is epoxy. It's often used for for marine uses, where wood is used on boats, hulls, fittings and things like that, and above ground woodwork. But you can also use it on regular furniture, but you will lose some of the crisp detail as you use that. So I don't really think there's any way around that. Certainly not that I've ever seen. Now I've got another question here. This one's come in by email, and it's from a man named Ken, and he tells me that he's just finished power washing his deck. The deck measures about 450 square feet on 3 different levels, and it was extremely dirty. So the change is incredible, he says. The deck is made of pressure-treated lumber, and it was installed about 18 years ago, and he's been told that he should put on a coat of end-cut treatment as a preservative and a water repellent. He definitely does not want to put on any sort of stain, he tells me, because he doesn't want the ongoing work of doing that. So he wants to know if he should be using end-cut treatment on the entire deck, and is it a good idea or is it necessary? The short answer is no. It's not a particularly good idea, mostly because it's not necessary. Pressure-treated wood is surprisingly resistant to rot, especially if the deck, all the parts of the deck are above ground. You won't have any trouble with rot setting in, and the fact that the deck is 18 years old now, and Ken hasn't mentioned anything about rot setting in, that's a pretty good indication that that wood's not going to do too much. The end cut treatment is a preservative liquid that's applied on the ends of boards that you cut, because the middle of those ends are going to they're not going to have the same level of pressure treatment. So if you're working with that sort of wood, the end cut treatment is something that you'd brush on to fresh ends that you've cut. But I don't think that's necessary. I bother with it. I think your deck's going to last just fine, and you're interested in fairly low maintenance, and I think you can just work pretty well for you. Oh, good. I got another question here. Thank you, from SH. And the question is it safe to use pressure-treated wood for a garden box? SH is wondering if the chemical used to treat the wood may diffuse out over time. Is cedar a better idea? Yes, I think if I were doing this, I would go with cedar. Not because I think today's pressure-treated wood is particularly dangerous. It's certainly much less toxic than pressure-treated wood from the good old days. And by that, I mean about 10 years ago or so. Up until that time, all pressure-treated wood was preserved with some sort of, with an arsenic compound. And that sounds pretty scary. I've never seen any evidence to suggest that it actually was a health hazard, but the pressure-treated wood industry decided to head things off at the pass, and they've completely changed their chemical formulations, at least on the consumer level. So now most of the compounds are based on some sort of a type of copper, and it varies from manufacturer to manufacturer. But I believe pressure-treated wood is safe. But cedar works almost as well. It's not quite as rot resistant as pressure-treated wood, but for something like a garden box where you might be growing some vegetables or something in it, I think that would be a good choice. I would use the cedar. It looks nicer too. It smells nicer. It's easier to deal with the offcuts afterwards because you're not supposed to burn pressure-treated wood or anything like that. So, but if you have some cedar, then you may be able to use it for other projects and certainly dispose of it in the usual sort of way. So I hope that helps. Okay, we got another question in from Hans Peters. Thank you, Hans. And he asks, how do you prevent a waxy deposit in a septic outflow pipe from forming, or how do you treat it? Well, that's a great question. There aren't too many people who've looked inside of a septic tank. I mean, it's not too pretty, but someone's got to look in there from time to time, if for nothing else other than to pump it out. And depending on the tank design and other factors, that I don't really understand fully. Some tanks will develop this sort of greasy, waxy, whitish, semi-solid in the intake pipe of the tank. So the pipe from your house comes into the tank. It doesn't just empty into the tank, though. It almost always empties into a kind of a T fitting that's open at the top and the bottom. And the idea there is to stop or minimize any turbulence of the sewage coming in, because you don't want to stir the tank up. You want all the solids to settle out, and you want it to be as calm as possible in there. So the T-shaped fitting does this, but it also can promote the development of this white waxy stuff. And I've seen a couple of cases where it's actually plugged the flow of sewage from the house. And as I said, I don't know why it happens with some houses and not with others. It's not too common. There's nothing you can really do to stop that. I wonder, Hans, maybe you can type in with a little more information here. Has this situation of yours, has it caused a sewage blockage? Has it caused the sewage to stop flowing into your tank? As I said, I've seen this happen. It's usually pretty easy to clean out, though, and then you just open up the first chamber of the tank and you get a stick or something that you don't want to keep for other uses, and you just kind of poke down into the top of this this T to break up that deposit. And even in a tank that's prone to this sort of thing, I don't think you're going to have a redevelopment of that within a year. I mean, it takes some time. Now, actually, I should mention, one winter night, we had a scare at our place. One of my sons was taking a shower, and I could hear some funny sounds in the drains of sinks and things on the first floor where I was, and I realized we had some sort of a blockage. I thought it was my septic system failing, and I'm glad it wasn't. It was a kind of a buildup within the pipe itself, and I think this would be hardened grease and things like that. So a little bit different than what you're talking about here, Hans. But what I ended up using to clean it out was something called a clog hog, which is a great tool. I use it for refurbishing septic systems that have clogged and failed. I actually sell a little course on how to do this, but the clog hog, if you can imagine, it's a flexible attachment for the end of a pressure washer. So you take the regular wand off the pressure washer and you apply this, you thread on this clog hog, which is a flexible hose, and it's got a nozzle on the end. The nozzle shoots in two different directions. There's several jets that shoot at an angle kind of backwards from the nozzle, and then there's one stream that shoots out the front of the nozzle. So it's kind of self-propelled in that it pulls itself in. Does a tremendous job. I mean, it really, especially if you get it hooked up to a powerful pressure washer, 3,500, 4,000 PSI or so, that thing it's just like a snake that draws itself in, and it cleans everything out. So that's the way I clean out pipes. But this sort of waxy buildup at the front of the tank, at the inlet to the tank, is something that you can just poke out. I don't know of any way to prevent it except just a little bit of regular preventative maintenance, really. So I hope that helps. Hans has just written back here. He says, this waxy deposit was actually spotted by doing a video on the outflow pipe past the tank. I would think the deposit would also be in the field itself. No field issues yet, just trying to prevent it. Yeah, well, you're wise to treat your septic system as gently as possible, because replacement is an enormous expense. I mean, you can easily get into 5 figures, and there's the disruption to your yard. And if you happen to live in an area jurisdiction requires new septic systems to be in places in the world like this, then not only when you get rid of your old system, which would probably be grandfathered out of this requirement, but when you get your new system, not only do you get your 5-figure bill and your disrupted yard, but now you've got to pay an inspector to come in every year and take a look at your system and making sure it's working properly. So if you can keep the old system working well, then that's very wise. Back in 2012, our septic system out here where I live on Manitoulin Island in Ontario, Canada, failed. We smelled something. I opened up the hatch to the risers coming up from the tank, and we had about a foot of sewage on top of the tank. That wasn't good news. And I tried a bunch of different things. Long story short, I developed this method of jetting the leaching pipes. So I dug down, found the ends of the leaching pipes, cleaned it all out with the clog hog, did a tremendous job. One of the 4 leaching pipes was completely plugged. It wasn't flowing anything at all, and the others were just feebly leaching the sewage. Cleaned them all out. I treated the soil around the pipes with professional grade product that I got from the States. You kind of have to, you mix it up. It's a powder you mix with water, and you direct it into the leaching pipes, and it increases the percolation rate of the soil around the pipes. You can only do that when you've already cleaned your pipes out. I tried a whole bunch of things before this, different tank additives, air bubblers in the tank. Nothing helped until I figured this system out. And that would have been in 2014 by the time I figured that out. Here we are now, August 2018. That septic system has been working perfectly, and we have lots of people at the house here. So I've reconfigured the leaching pipes, so I've got them marked. I can dig down about a foot. I can find them easily. They now have threaded caps. I can take off the end, and I use this jetting system. I can use this jetting system to clean them out and basically maintain my system in the field bed. And I haven't had to do that yet, but you might want to consider something like that. Hence, if not now, then if your system starts to show some trouble later on, but certainly saved me a pile of money and a pile of disruption too. So I've got a little video course that I sell on that too. You email me or contact me and I can give you the information for that. So, okay, I'll just go to some emailed questions now. Let's hear. Deck questions are really popular at this time of the year, as you'd imagine. I would say at least 1/3 of the questions I get by email have to do with deck building, mostly deck finishing. So here's Cindy, and she tells me that they're building a new cedar deck at her house, and she's the lucky person who gets to prep and stain the deck. So in the past, she tells me that she's done a light sanding and stained all sides of every piece of wood before installing it. Do I believe this is a good approach for even coverage? And if not, how would I prepare a deck? Well, some manufacturers, in some brands, Seekins is one of them, they recommend finishing all 6 sides of every deck board that goes on the top. And the implication is that they feel that the deck finish will last longer. I don't agree with that. I've spent a lot of time testing deck finishes. I started testing particular finishes back in 1990, and I've kept track of a good size handful of different sorts of deck finishes to see how long they last. And I haven't found a benefit from finishing all 6 sides. It's also a great big pain too. I mean, it uses more than twice the amount of finish as just finishing the top. You've got to coat each piece and then let it dry before you can put it on. So it takes a whole lot more time. And in my experience, deck finishes do not increase the working life of wood. They don't stop it from rotting. They just make it look nicer. And even if you did finish all 6 sides of every board, what's going to happen in 2 or 3 years when it's time to renew that finish? I mean, you can't renew the finish underneath or on the sides of the boards or anything like that. So I don't do it, and I don't recommend it. And as far as an approach goes, so if I'm not doing this, then what am I recommending? That's more complicated. I've got a very long web page on this whole topic where I talk about preparation strategies. My favorite is to pressure wash first. This applies to new and old wood. Pressure wash first, and then when the wood is dry, give it a light sanding with 80 grit, an 80 grit disc in a 6-inch random orbit sander. It's a pretty good machine. It covers a lot of ground, and then apply a finish of your choice. Now, the finish of your choice business, that's the hard part, because there are a great many deck finishes out there that just don't work well no matter what you do. You could do everything right and you can put it on and it fails in 6 months or so. There's one brand in particular, they must have had a really bad formulation, because the symptoms are always the same. Someone will write to me and say, I bought this finish and I put it on 6 months ago, or I put it on in the fall, and now it's the spring and it's peeling off in sheets. What did I do wrong? So I'll ask them the name of the finish, and 9 times out of 10, I can pick out the name, because there's one particular kind that's horrible. There's lots of them that aren't all that good. That's why I did the deck testing, the deck finish testing. So that's on my website too. If you go to baileylineroad.com and you search for deck finishes, I think it'll probably come up. If you want more information, email me, contact me somehow, and I'll direct you to that page. But it's a top ranking page in Google. It's got a lot of information in it. It's got everything I know about deck finishing. The main thing to understand, though, is how much maintenance responsibility do you want to take on? Because there are some, we'll call it laissez-faire deck finishing strategies where you're really not doing much. Maybe you're not doing anything at all, or maybe you're just doing a little bit, or maybe you want a finish that you never have to strip, but you just renew it every year or so. That's an option too. Or maybe you want some sort of furniture grade deck that looks like a coffee table or something and is really beautiful and rich and shiny and brown. Well, there's a strategy for that too, but you have to understand that there's certain maintenance obligations that come with each choice. So, I hope that helps, Cindy. And as I said, deck finishing is a pretty popular topic right now. So, good. Okay. We've got something here from Cheryl. She says, I have a dog that insists on using the garage floor as a potty. We put pads out, but sure. But her aim sucks, it says. Okay, what can you recommend to deep clean the concrete for urine mistakes, as we do not want a smelly garage? Well, that's a great question. Okay. I would start, oxygen is a very powerful odor killing element. And oxygen can be used in a couple of different ways. One way that I really like to use oxygen for deodorizing a room or a vehicle is with what's called an ozone generator. This is a plug-in electric device. It's not some sort of funny airy-fairy kind of air purifier thing, but professional restoration professionals will use ozone technology when they want to deodorize a room, for instance, that's had some smoke damage. You can go online and you'll see a number of different ozone generators, and they produce ozone, which actually is an oxygen molecule that's made up of 3 oxygen atoms. So regular oxygen is O2, 2 oxygen atoms together to form a molecule. Ozone is O3. So there's kind of this extra oxygen atom loosely tacked onto the molecule. And it doesn't really like to be there. So you end up having a single oxygen molecule floating around in the air, and it wants to bind with something. It's a powerful oxidizer, in other words, and it attacks odors really well. Now, as I said, that's what I like to use for rooms and vehicles and things like that. It works really good, really well. For a floor, I would try one of the new oxygen-based stain removers. Now, I don't know whether you have staining or not, but I have found that these oxygen-based stain removers do attack odors quite well too, probably for the same reason that the ozone generator works so well for airborne smells and things. And you can get it as a powder that you mix with water. lately I've been testing a new formulation. It's two liquids that come together in the same jug. The jug is divided in the middle, and you kind of pour it out together. And when the two liquids mix, then they form this oxygen-based stain remover that also happens to work pretty well for odor control. Spread it around, and that'll clean up any staining, and I bet that it would do a really good job on the odors as well. So why don't you just let me know, and I hope that helps. So Helen writes, LED 9.5 LED watts, a replacement for 60 watt. If I would like the equivalent of 100 watt that has a 60 watt maximum, can I use a higher watt of LED bulb? You know, the answer is yes, actually, you can. And the reason why there's a wattage limitation on regular incandescent bulbs is because of the heat they give off. A regular, like 100 watt incandescent bulb is going to get very hot, and the fixture and the wiring that leads to it needs to be made fixture that's rated for 60 watts with a regular incandescent bulb. Then there's no reason why you can't put an LED bulb in there that gives out the equivalent of 100 watts of light, or the light from a 100 watt incandescent light bulb. The issue comes down to heat, and LED bulbs do give off a little bit of heat, but far, far less heat than an incandescent bulb. So absolutely, you can go ahead and, you know, whatever wattage of LED bulb you find that gives off that 100 watt equivalent of light, then you can go ahead and use that in your fixture, and I'm sure you'll have no trouble at all. So now, for some reason, my oh, there we are. Okay. Okay, Stephanie has a question here. We have dark pre-finished hardwood floors, she writes. A floor cleaner and the floor cleaner left a haze on the floor. It always looks dirty. With ammonia-free Windex, without luck. Any suggestions on how to get the shine back? Yeah, actually, I do have a suggestion, and it has to do with a technique that I've developed for wood finishing, and it has to do with buffing. So if you were to take a random orbit sander, say a 5-inch diameter, they're the most common. 6-inch would probably be better for a floor because you've got a lot of ground to cover. But and I'm not going to suggest you do any sanding, but instead of sandpaper on the disc of the sander, what you do is you put on a 3M rubbing pad. So I buy mine from Lee Valley Tools. I don't have any special reason to recommend them, except it seems like the handiest source for me to get them. If you go there to the Lee Valley website and you type in 3M rubbing pads, it'll take you right to the item. Different, to see medium, fine, and super fine. And what I would recommend for your floor, Stephanie, is to start with the fine. That's going to create a kind of a satin sheen. So what you do is you cut a square of this rubbing pad out, you put it on the pad of the sander, and then you just turn the sander on, and you kind of let the jiggling and the oscillations of the sander wiggle that pad around on the floor, and it's going to give you a nice even satin sheen. Now I know you want something glossier, but I think you should start with the fine in order to get any residue off of the floor. And then if that's not glossy enough for you, then you can do the same procedure again with the superfine. The superfine pad in the 3M rubbing pad family is white. And you cut it out, as I said, just a little bit bigger than the pad of the sander, and then you put the pad on the floor and the sander on the pad, and then you switch it on and you kind of work back and forth in a certain area. I use this technique to buff up finishes on woodworking projects. I have a video about this on my YouTube channel, actually, as well as on my website. And it's one of my most popular videos because it's a pretty amazing technique. It does a fabulous job. I think you'll really like the results you get. And, you know, give it a try. Let me know how that works out for you. Okay. Let's see. Okay, Helen. She was the one who asked me about the LED bulbs a few minutes ago. She wonders about where to find DuoBlast. But it says here, but Home Depot said it's only available in the US. Okay, let me back up a little bit. So DuoBlast is sort of the latest formulation of that oxygen-based stain that I was telling you about, that I was also recommending for dealing with dog urine smells in a garage. And actually, you know, for us Canadians, this is kind of unusual. Usually we get stuff after it appears in America, but because DuoBlast is a Canadian product, we're actually getting it in stores first. And I'm told that it's available in the Home Depot system in Canada right now. And if you're interested, you know, email me at steve@stevemaxwell.ca, and I can give you the product numbers for this, because as usual with these things, when a product is new in the system, it takes quite a while for the store clerks to realize. And if they've never heard it before, they're going to tell you, oh, we don't have that, when really they might have it. And in this case, they do have it. Now, so is a very effective oxygen-based stain remover that I've been testing. Right now, it's only available in Canada. So the story that you've been told, Helen, that it's only available in the US actually isn't true. It's only available in Canada right now. And I'm told that by the last quarter of 2018, that it will be available in the US as well. So, but anyway, steve@stevemaxwell.ca. And, you know, I can give you some information that I've been given about availability. So, okay, we've got a question here, again from Hans. How do you get the shine back on marble that shows dull spots where water has been sitting over the years? Well, once again, I would try this buffing technique that I mentioned before. The 3M rub. Chances are you've got some kind of a mineral buildup. Now, if you had a mineral buildup on, say, stainless steel or glass or plastic, I would tell you to put some pretty strong vinegar on that, 7%. You can even get 10% acetic acid vinegar, especially made for cleaning. If it was stainless, glass, you know, plastic of any kind, that works really well. But you do not want to do this on marble, because marble is a kind of limestone. It's calcium based, and the vinegar will eat that quite readily. So you're going to ruin the finish that you've got. So stay away from any sort of vinegar. But I think you'll find that the polishing does a great job using that random orbit sander with the 3M rubbing pads. Start with the fine again. Just do a little bit gently near the area of a dull spot and just see what it does. I think you're going to find that it works pretty well. And if you want more of a finish, then you can go with the super fine too. But if nothing else, I think it's going to even out that dull spot and make the whole surface look good. So I'll go to another question here. This is from Chuck. This is by email. And Chuck lives in Manassas, Virginia. And he tells me that he built a cedar deck in the spring of 2006. And he originally finished it with Seekins Sea-Tall deck. That's actually one of my recommended finishes. I've tested it. I find that it works quite well. So I did all steps, including staining all 6 sides of each board. As I said before in the broadcast, Seekins is one of the companies that recommends 6-sided board finishing. My deck was beautiful, but I got tired of keeping up with it. Because yeah, it does, you do have to do a strip and refinish about every 2 or 3 years with that product. It looks great, but you're not going to get more than about 3 years, certainly in sunlight. So I understand what he's talking about here. I did a soda blaster to remove the old Seekins finish from the top surface, and then sanded the deck and finished with water repellent, since here, which looked terrible and did not last. So soda blaster, that's kind of like sandblasting. And he the deck with this water, which I'm not surprised. They don't last that long. Certainly, I bet his deck looks pretty gray and streaky right now. He didn't send me any pictures, but that's usually what happens. So I've decided to do what I should have done in the first place. That is to strip off all the old finish, sand everything, and refinish my deck with something. Since I originally finished the cedar on all 6 sides with Seekins, can I use Seekins deck, or do you have another recommendation? Well, you know, the short answer is I don't think your previous use of the Seekins product is going to oblige you to use anything else right now. You know, remnants of that old finish are still going to be present between the boards and underneath, but that doesn't really matter. It's the top surface you're concerned about. And I guess you really just have to decide what sort of maintenance approach you want to take. As you know, maintaining a colored film forming finish, which is the category that Seekins deck fits into, it's like varnish that's got a color to it. That requires stripping and refinishing. So you probably don't want to get back on that band again. Well, generally speaking, the more opaque the deck finish, the less, all else being equal. Now, all else doesn't always equal. So, you know, there are some opaque deck finishes that don't last a long time, but one of them that lasts a very long time, the longest that I've ever heard of, is Cabot decking stain. That's also on my list of recommended choices because it lasts 5 or 6 years in full sun, which is about as long as you can expect a deck finish of that sort that forms a kind of a film to last. So the only problem is the Cabot decking stain is opaque, so it basically looks like paint. So your deck isn't really going to look like a wooden deck too much anymore. So that's one drawback. If you go to the other end of the spectrum, there's a product called Eco Wood Treatment, which is a powder that you mix with water and you spray it on. It doesn't look like much when you put it on. It just looks like, you know, weak tea or something like that. It's just it's water that's a little bit colored, but and it's non-toxic. It's not caustic. It doesn't hurt you. It's not going to poison you. There's no fumes. So you put it on and it changes the color of the wood by chemical reaction. It doesn't happen right away, but over the course of weeks and even months, it's going to turn fresh, light-colored wood into a kind of a nice, even, grayish brown kind of color. And it looks quite nice. And in time, it's basically just going to look more and more weathered. But unlike natural weathering, which can happen unevenly on the wood, some areas can become very weathered, and areas with a little bit of shelter won't be as weathered, and it looks kind of ratty. So the Eco Wood Treatment is something you just put on once. You just do it once, and then that's it. And it gives a nice, even tone to it, and it's classier than regular natural wood finishing. You don't have to do anything after that. So that's another option. More and more often lately, there is also the option of oiling your deck. And Australian timber oil is something that I'm experimenting with now. I think it's going to be on my list of recommended finishes. It's a fairly thick exterior oil. Now, you've got to reapply it every, I don't know, every year or two, or certainly not much more than two. But the beauty is there's no real prep work. Unlike with a film forming finish, which you have to completely strip back. It's a lot of work. Stripping, pressure washing, sanding. The actual application of a new film forming finish is really the smallest part of the job. But with exterior oil finishes, you just have to clean it, and then you put on more oil and it soaks in. There's never any peeling. It doesn't look as refined as a film forming finish, like a tinted film forming finish like Seekins deck, but it's a lot easier to maintain. It's classier, it's fancier than the Eco wood treatment, so maybe that's an option for you too. But I hope that helps, Hans, and sorry, not Hans. This was Chuck, actually, so I hope that helps, Chuck. Cheryl has another question for me. Thank you for keeping them coming, by the way. You know, when you do something like this, you're always wondering whether you're broadcasting out into the air and no one's listening. So it's nice to see that people are paying attention and getting something out of this. Cheryl writes, kitchen cupboards that are white, but the trim has turned yellow. Besides painting, can I use something to make them white again? It happened on every kitchen cupboard, as you see, white beside yellow trim. Well, without actually seeing it, I can't say for sure because I don't know the material involved. I mean, it may be that some mild abrasion by hand this time with some of those 3N rubbing pads will bring back the white color in the yellowed areas. I mean, it's possible. I think it's worth a try. You can just get some. I would try it with a fine grade and just do a little rubbing. And as I said, by hand, because it's the trim has turned yellow, so it's going to be some sort of profiled shape. You can't use the sander to power buff it, but you can rub it with that. See if that doesn't restore some of the white color. It might. It's worth a try. If it doesn't, then I think maybe repainting is the way to go. You can do a pretty good job on your own, though. Nowadays, 100% acrylic latex paint sticks very well. I mean, use the right kind of primer and it'll stick to just about anything. You can even get it to stick to vinyl siding and aluminum siding on the outside of your house. It's really improved a lot that way. And if you get a formulation that has a flat sheen, you can even use a brush to refinish kitchen cabinets, and they're going to look great. So give the 3M rubbing pad a try, and if not, then I think painting is the way to go. But thank you for that. Thank you for that question. Okay, let's go on here. I have a question by email from Elaine, and she says that she's got a squeaky bathroom floor, and a friend has identified where the squeak originates but can't get at it. The floor is a ceramic tile, and he can see that when the builders put the heat duct through, presumably in the basement underneath, they took out some of the bridging in the floor. So this is probably why there's some movement and squeaking. He's added bridging wherever he could, but cannot get back at the squeak in the adjacent tiled floor. He's not given up hope, but at this point is defeated. Do I have any suggestions? Well, you know, if this floor was a hardwood, our job would be a lot easier because you can stabilize and stop the squeaks in a hardwood floor, even if you can only get to it from the top. There are different systems and different approaches that use a very tiny headed screw to drive down and stabilize the floor by holding it firm to the underlying joist. And it's possible to fill the little hole left behind with a finish that that can be, well, a hole that can be filled on the existing finish. So if it was hardwood, then our job would be a lot easier. But in your case with ceramic, I think the best thing you can do is if your friend can see where the squeaking is coming from, I wonder if he might be able to cut some sort of a fairly long wedge, put a little bit of glue on the end, and just kind of feed it in and tap it in from afar to stabilize that area. So tapping it in between the underside of the subfloor and the top of the floor joist. I mean, presumably if he can see the spot, maybe he can't quite reach it, but maybe if he cut a fairly long wedge of wood, he could tap that in. I'd be careful about tapping it too hard, though. It's a ceramic floor and it's prone to cracking, so you really just want to stabilize things. So some wood glue on the end of that wedge, tapped in place, not really forcefully, but just enough to hold it, and then stay off the floor overnight, say. Give that glue a chance to dry, and I think that'd probably be your best bet. I can't think of any other way to do it other than that, leaving your floor intact. So I hope that helps, Elaine. Okay. Go for another email question here that was sent in previously. This is from Kelly. And Kelly is considering building on some bedrock in an area north of Kingston, Ontario. And he's wondering, will he require footings, or can he station walls directly on the rock, pinning to the rock if necessary? He also says that he understands he's going to need an engineer to approve his design, but was wondering about my experience in the past with the Ontario Building Code, because it doesn't seem to address the issue of building foundations on bedrock. He says, note that even with some backfill, the interface between the granite and the foundation will not be below the frost line around the majority of the perimeter of the house. Well, because I happen to live in an area where bedrock's never very far from the surface, I can answer your question perfectly, because I've built a number of things directly on bedrock. First, you don't need a footing. The purpose of a footing is to create a wider area on which a foundation wall can rest, because the surface area of the bottom of the foundation wall isn't large enough for the soil underneath of it to support it. So a footing is kind of like a snowshoe to hold up your building. And the soil directly under the foundation wall, you need to make a kind of a wider footprint. So that's the purpose of a footing. In a sense, it's kind of like creating bedrock in a way. Now, if you've already got bedrock and it truly is solid, then you don't need a footing. It's going to work just fine. Bedrock is by far the best foundation that you can get. Now, and it doesn't matter if that bedrock is not below the frost line. That was one of, I'm sorry, I said this person's name was Kelly. It's actually Matt. The purpose of having a foundation below the frost line is so that the soil underneath the foundation wall won't freeze, because if it freezes, it's going to expand, and it expands with tremendous power, and nothing's going to stop it. So it's going to break that foundation wall. It's going to cause cracking. But if you're already on bedrock, then there's nothing below your foundation wall that's going to freeze. I mean, the soil on the side of the foundation wall might freeze, and that can cause the foundation wall to be pushed inwards, to crack inwards. But that danger applies whether you're on bedrock or not. And there are strategies for but as far as bedrock goes, you don't have to worry about being below the frost line, and you don't need a foundation. You don't need a footing. Your foundation wall can be on the rock. So all of these things are good news, but there is a challenge, and it's a challenge that's not immediately apparent. See, let's say you build a foundation wall on the bedrock, and you've got some, and it's not filled with soil. So you've got a crawl space or a basement or some open area underneath there, and the bedrock is the floor, then you're going to have humidity challenges in the summertime. I guarantee it. And the reason is because the bedrock remains quite cold compared with the surrounding air. So in your crawl space or your basement, you're going to get warm, moist air from the outside making its way into the crawl space area. And that's unavoidable. Even if you have some windows or vents and they're closed, that air is still going to get in and it's going to cool off. And what was summertime air with a relative humidity of 80 or 90%, when it cools down 10 or 15 degrees, which it can easily do above bedrock, then relative humidity is going to go sky high and it's going to hit 100%. And you're going to have, and that rock's going to get wet from the condensation. And that's going to make the air very humid in there. And I know of buildings that were built in this way where attention to this whole issue of cooling and condensation was not done. And 15 or 20 years later, you got completely rotten floor joists, because every summer it's like it's in a rainforest. So one thing you can do is to, depending on how much soil you've got, if you only have a little bit of soil above your bedrock, then you should not have any sort of a crawl space or basement at all. Just build your foundation walls on the rock and backfill that foundation with fill that you compact. So every time you add 6 inches of new fill, you compact it down. If you try to compact too much at once, it's not going to compact all the way down and you're going to get settling later. So do this sort of thing and then pour a concrete floor on top of it, level with the top of the foundation wall, and you've eliminated that problem. Another approach, if you really want, if you've got the height to make a basement, then you can, and your bedrock is fairly flat, you can do some backfilling, put down at least 2 inches of extruded polystyrene foam, 4 inches would be better, concrete to make a floor that's insulated underneath. That works quite well too. It's kind of expensive and troublesome. It's going to work well for you. Here at my own place, I built my house directly on bedrock. There's 8 feet from the beautiful limestone bedrock floor to the underside of the joists, and I didn't understand about this dynamic. So my strategy is to, when it's warmer outside than it is inside, the basement windows always stay closed. The only time I open them is when it's cooler outside than it is in the basement. And when those windows are closed, I run a dehumidifier on a timer. I also have an oscillating room fan, which kind of blows the dehumidified air around. I have the dehumidifier set on a timer so that it only runs when electricity is cheap. And I can, with that setup, I can maintain a 1,200 square foot basement between 70 and 80% relative. So set wind in the evening, during the night, and then it shuts off in the morning when electricity gets expensive again. And I have found after a night's run will be 70%. Before the dehumidifier, the relative humidity would have crept up to 80% is about the limit. You don't want it to go any higher than 80 because then you start getting condensation. So, I hope that helps, Matt. I see here from your email that you're planning to use insulated concrete forms for your foundation wall. And that's a good thing because bedrock's never perfectly flat and it's never perfectly level. So you're going to have to cut the bottom edge of your forms to fit the undulations of that bedrock. And the insulated concrete forms are by far the easiest to scribe to fit. So I get questions like this from time to time from bedrock kind of areas, and my answer is always the same. So I hope this has helped. Okay, we've got some other questions coming in. Kenny writes, I have an aged poured concrete outside porch in good shape. Can I pour fresh concrete on top of the surface? I would like a stamped concrete appearance, and I do not mind a higher floor. I've seen this done. You need to prepare the surface quite well, and you need to have a sufficient thickness of new concrete. I mean, you're going to need more than an inch. I mean, I don't think an inch is going to stand up very well. To be honest, I really don't know what the minimum thickness would be. I know a couple of guys that specialize in stamped concrete work. My guess would be that you'd need at least 2, maybe more, in order to be stable and not to break up. I would check with someone about depth, but I think you can do it. I've seen it done. One thing you'd want to be sure to do after you've really cleaned that floor and removed anything loose whatsoever, you would want to treat the surface with a concrete adhesive sort of mixture. This is essentially the same chemistry as that they use for white wood glue, except it's thinner, and you can add it to the concrete and it makes it stick to existing concrete a lot better. And you can also brush it on to the surface that you're bonding to before you put the new concrete on. And if you can bond the old stuff to the new stuff with this method, and you get sufficient depth of new concrete, then I think it's going to work just fine for you. So keep me posted. I'd like to see some pictures if you try it. Okay, let's see here. Okay, this is from Sheehan, and Sheehan asks, I've read in your column in the Ottawa Citizen and noticed occasional questions related to permanent wood foundations. I'm looking for an expert or contractor with experience in permanent wood foundations in the area to help diagnose whether I have a moisture issue with the pressure-treated wood foundation in my home. Is this something you would do, or could you recommend someone? Well, unfortunately, I live too far away to make a visit to this person. I do write a weekly column for the Ottawa Citizen, but I'm about, I don't know, 5 or 6 or 7 hours drive away from that city. But it's certainly possible that you could have a moisture problem with a pressure-treated wood foundation. A lot of people are surprised to realize that it is within the building code to actually build a foundation wall out of wood that's below ground. And the reason that's possible is because of pressure treatment chemicals that basically make that wood completely rot-proof forever. So these pressure-treated wood foundations are made with regular lumber, like 2x6s, and also heavily pressure-treated plywood. And there's certain ways they have to be built, and you have to use stainless steel fasteners to hold them together, and no corrosion allowed. But they do well. So I don't think there would be an issue with rot in this question, but there very well could be an issue of moisture migration coming in. Anytime you put something below the ground, your number one enemy is going to be moisture. And maybe that's the question being asked here. But if you can give me some more details, maybe I can point you in the right direction. And I do have contacts, builders I know all across the country, certainly, and then even across the continent, and maybe I can suggest someone. So I hope that helps a little bit. Okay, so I've got, my time's almost up. I'm going to wrap this up at 8:30, but I have time for, let's see, one more question, I think, here. This is from Gary. He's talking to me about a crack in some plaster and drywall. Let's see. This home's about 50 years old, and there's a crack developing down the center of the living room ceiling. If this is a plaster ceiling, and it very well could be with a home of that age, this being happening to be a drywall ceiling. We're not the original owners. So the thing is, both plaster and drywall can crack. And a house that's 50 years old, it's probably in that zone of time when they kind of had a hybrid approach to walls. I mean, once upon a time, interior walls were plastered. There were thin strips of wood that were nailed to the framing, and several coats of plaster was applied by trowel to that. That's sort of old-time plastering. And now we have drywall, which is the sheet material, screws are driven in. And so there was a kind of an in-between period where there was drywall-like sheets nailed to the wall and a complete plaster over it. So you may have that kind of thing going on, Gary. The main issue with any kind of crack is it getting worse or is it stable? Because a crack that's stable, that just forms, I mean, that happens all the time. Things can dry out and shrink a little bit, and it's very common for drywall and plaster to crack for those reasons. As long as the crack's not getting any bigger, then you can cut it out with a V-shaped cut and fill it and finish it and paint it, and it'll probably be okay. It's not gonna be a problem. But if the crack is getting bigger, then that's an indication of some sort of creeping underlying problem, and you'll want to get to the bottom of that. Now, chances are that's not the problem. Chances are stable crack foundations, or in walls above foundations, they're shifting. But I think that just keep your eye on it, and if it doesn't change shape, doesn't get bigger, then go ahead and fix it. Maybe take a pencil and mark some dates in one corner of your room and measure the width of the crack carefully with a metric ruler. So measure it in fine increments of, half a millimeter or 1 millimeter on such and such a date, and keep track of it that way. And that'll probably serve you well too. I hope so. Good. Well, I guess it's pretty much 8:30, pretty much time for me to sign off. I've gotten some nice compliments here from Sherry. Truly enjoyed the live stream. I sure learned a lot. Well, I'm glad you're here, Cheryl. And Kenny says, look forward to watching more broadcasts. So I guess we'll do this again sometime. It seems to have worked okay. So one of the issues I have is that I've just been talking into my camera all night. And I mean, I've been reading your typed information, but I really don't know what it looks like, what I look like at your end, what I sound like at your end. So if you just drop me an email and let me know what was the video quality like, what was the audio quality like, what was the lighting like, I can make changes as necessary. My email address is steve@stevemaxwell.ca, and I'd appreciate hearing from you. But anyway, thank you again. It was a pleasure helping you out. Bye for now.